I'm Zach Johnson, also known as the Millennial Farmer.
What really happened to Zach Johnson, the man millions of people know as a millennial farmer, is not a story about a farmer who simply became famous on YouTube. It is a story about a family farm, an unexpected internet career, a growing responsibility to agriculture, and a man who suddenly found himself trying to balance two very different worlds. In May 2026, Zach reached a remarkable milestone. 10 years since he began sharing his life on YouTube. But the surprising part is that the biggest change in his life was never really about becoming an internet celebrity. It was about discovering what his platform could do for farmers, rural communities, and the future of agriculture. Before the camera, sponsors, podcasts, and millions of views, Zach Johnson was simply a Minnesota farmer. His official Millennial Farmer website describes him as a fifth-generation family farmer from west central Minnesota. Farming was not something he discovered after becoming famous. It was a foundation of his life long, before anyone outside his community knew his name. His work centered on the family farm, the crops, the machinery, the weather, and the endless decisions that determine whether a growing season succeeds or fails. And that is important because the Millennial Farmer story did not begin with a carefully designed business plan. It began with a communication problem. Zach was seeing criticism and misinformation about agriculture online, particularly around modern farming practices and genetically modified crops. Instead of spending all his time arguing with strangers, he decided there was another way to respond. He could simply show people what farming actually looked like. That decision eventually became the foundation of an enormous digital platform. According to YouTube's own account of his journey, Zach's first video was remarkably simple. He put his phone on an oil drum in his shed and explained that he wanted people to follow the growing season from planting all the way through harvest. There was no giant studio, no elaborate production crew, and no television network behind him. The idea was almost the opposite of traditional entertainment. Let people see what happens on an actual farm. At first, there was no reason to believe this would become a major career. Farming is repetitive from the outside. Planting, spraying, repairing machinery, hauling grain, and watching the weather might not sound like the ingredients of viral entertainment. But Zach discovered something that many creators spend years trying to understand. People were fascinated by a world they rarely saw. For someone living in a city, a combine moving through a cornfield can be almost as unfamiliar as a spaceship. For someone who has never operated farm equipment, a broken belt, a stuck tractor, or a difficult harvest suddenly becomes a story. Zach did not have to invent drama. Farming already provided it. Then came the first unmistakable sign that something unusual was happening. YouTube reports that Zach's first revenue check was only $92. At the time, that amount was exciting not because it was life-changing money, but because it proved that people were actually willing to watch this kind of content. That tiny payment represented something much bigger. The internet was telling Zach that his ordinary work was not ordinary to everyone else. As the audience grew, the channel began transforming from a personal experiment into a serious media operation. Harvest footage, equipment problems, weather challenges, and everyday farm decisions became episodes in an ongoing story. Viewers weren't simply watching individual videos. They were following a family and a farm through the seasons. And Zach's personality mattered just as much as the machinery. He did not present himself as a perfect expert who had every answer. His content worked because it felt like a farmer talking about farming. There was humor, frustration, mistakes, repairs, and plenty of unpredictability. In a 2024 interview with DTN, Zach emphasized that authenticity was critical to his approach. His point was essentially that people can tell when someone is pretending to be something they are not. That authenticity became one of the biggest reasons the channel could reach beyond agriculture. The official Millennial Farmer site says the mission is to build a connection between farms and consumers, provide farmer-to-farmer education, and create a collaborative conversation between farmers and the public. In other words, Zach wasn't simply trying to convince people to become farmers. He wanted people to understand farmers. That distinction changed everything. The audience eventually expanded far beyond rural America. People who had never driven a tractor began watching. Families with no farming background started following planting and harvest seasons. Viewers who knew almost nothing about crop production could suddenly see the amount of technology, planning, risk, and labor behind the food they purchased. And while the public saw Zach in front of the camera, another person was becoming increasingly important behind the scenes: his wife, Becky Johnson. The Millennial Farmer operation grew into something that required far more than recording videos. There were uploads to manage, footage to organize, business responsibilities, partnerships, merchandise, and communications. Zach could not simply leave the farm every day to become a full-time media executive. Someone had to help turn all those hours of farm footage into something viewers could actually watch. That division of responsibilities became a major part of the family story. Media coverage has described the channel as a team effort, with Becky editing the material Zach brings home from the farm. During busy harvest periods, the family was producing multiple videos each week. This is where the story becomes more complicated than the typical YouTube success story. Zach was becoming famous because he was showing people his real life. But the more successful the channel became, the more time that real life had to be spent producing content. The farm created the content, but the content also created a business. YouTube reported that by 2021, Zach was making more than 5 times as much money from the channel as he was from his crops. That statistic is astonishing when you consider where the story began. A farmer who started filming because he wanted to explain agriculture had reached a point where the media business surrounding the farm could generate more income than the farming itself. But this did not mean farming stopped being important. In fact, the success of the channel allowed Zach to become more involved in issues affecting the agricultural community. One of the most important examples was grain bin safety. Grain bins are a normal part of agricultural operations, but entering one can become extremely dangerous. Entrapment can happen quickly, and rural emergency departments may not always have the specialized equipment or training required for rescue. Zach and Becky created Harvest Outreach as a nonprofit organization designed to support farmers and the people who support the agricultural industry. Its official mission includes providing resources and support aimed at safety and success for farmers and farm advocates. One of its major efforts has focused on grain bin rescue. The idea was straightforward: raise awareness about the dangers and help rural first responders obtain the equipment and training necessary to respond when an accident occurs. Harvest Outreach says donations are distributed to rural first responders for grain bin rescue systems and training. This is one of the most important parts of Zach Johnson's story because it shows how his career changed after YouTube. At the beginning, he was using the platform to defend agriculture. Later, he was using the platform to help agriculture. That difference is enormous. According to DTN, Zach and Becky help provide funds to roughly 60 to 70 rural fire departments for grain bin rescue equipment. What began as online content had developed into a way of directing attention and resources toward problems that most people outside farming might never even consider. And the work did not stop there. Harvest Outreach also partnered with Anderson Bash to provide scholarships to students pursuing agriculture-related fields of study. The organization's official website says scholarship eligibility includes students from West Central Minnesota pursuing agriculture, engineering, or trade-related education. That creates an interesting circle in Zach's story. He grew up learning agriculture from the generation before him. Then he used modern technology to teach agriculture to people around the world. Now his organization is helping support people who could become part of the next generation of the industry. The platform that began with a phone in a shed had effectively become part of a much larger agricultural conversation. There was another organization that became important to Zach as well: Farm Rescue. Farm Rescue provides assistance to farm families facing major challenges, and Zach has supported the organization through volunteering and public awareness. DTN reported that he assisted with his first volunteer farm rescue case in 2022 and continued helping raise awareness for the organization. Farm Rescue itself has also documented Zach visiting farms to highlight the work of its volunteers. This is another reason the idea that Zach simply became famous misses the bigger picture. His audience became a tool for education, a tool for fundraising, a tool for connecting farmers with consumers, and a tool for telling stories that might otherwise remain invisible. But there's a deeper tension underneath all of this. What happens when a farmer becomes so successful at documenting farming that the documenting itself becomes a major part of his life? That is the question that makes Zach's story genuinely interesting. The family farm existed before YouTube and will always represent something different from the digital business built around it. Farming is tied to land, seasons, equipment, weather, and generations. YouTube is tied to algorithms, audience attention, uploads, and constantly changing technology. One is physical, the other is digital. One can be passed down through generations. The other can change overnight. Zach's challenge has been finding a way for those two worlds to exist together. And perhaps the most revealing part of his story is that he never abandoned the original purpose. In 2024, DTN reported that Zach continued to view authenticity as central to his role as a voice for agriculture. He explained that farmers trying to communicate with the public should understand what suits them and avoid forcing themselves into a personality that isn't genuine. That philosophy may explain why Millennial Farmer survived when so many internet channels disappear. The channel wasn't built around a temporary trend. It was built around Zach's actual life. Every year brought another planting season, another harvest, another set of equipment problems, another weather challenge, another opportunity to show viewers what farming really looked like. That gave the channel something most internet brands struggle to create, an endless source of authentic stories. And then, in May 2026, something happened that put the entire journey into perspective. 10 years had passed since Zach started the channel. NPR News reported in May 2026 that the Millennial Farmer was reflecting on a full decade as a YouTube creator. The report also featured Zach at his farm in Lowry, Minnesota, alongside his dog Anna, who has become a familiar presence in his videos. Think about how different that moment was from the beginning. 10 years earlier, Zach was putting a phone on an oil drum and explaining what he planned to do. Now, he had built a platform with more than 1 million subscribers. His official website currently describes the channel as having over 1 million subscribers. But perhaps the most surprising part is that after all those years, the core idea is still recognizable. Show people the farm. Show them the work. Show them the problems. Show them the successes. And let them understand that the people producing food are not abstract characters in an argument about agriculture. They are families. That message has become especially important because agriculture is often discussed from a distance. Consumers see prices in grocery stores. Politicians debate farm policy. Activists argue about chemicals and environmental issues. Companies promote agricultural technology. But the farmer standing in the field has to deal with the consequences of all of those debates in real time. Zach's videos put a human face on that reality. His dog appears. His family appears. His equipment breaks. The weather ruins plans. A crop can perform better or worse than expected. A repair can consume an entire day. A harvest can turn into a race against winter. And suddenly, farming doesn't look like a statistic anymore. It looks like someone's life. That may be the real reason Zach Johnson's story became so much bigger than expected. He didn't discover that farming was entertaining. He discovered that authenticity was entertaining. The internet is filled with people trying to manufacture attention. Zach did something almost completely different. He documented what was already happening around him. That is why the $92 first check is such an important detail. It represents the moment when he learned that people were willing to watch. But the money itself wasn't the real breakthrough. The breakthrough was realizing there was an audience on the other side of the camera. And that audience eventually gave him something much more valuable than income. It gave him influence. With influence came responsibility. And with responsibility came projects that had nothing to do with getting more views. Grain bin safety, rural first responders, farm families in crisis, agricultural scholarships, farm rescue, public education. Those efforts show that the evolution of Millennial Farmer wasn't simply from farmer to YouTuber. It was from farmer to communicator, and then from communicator to advocate. That is what really happened to Zach Johnson. He did not disappear from farming and move into Hollywood-style celebrity. He did not suddenly abandon the family operation, and there is no credible evidence that some secret tragedy or mysterious event caused him to vanish. The truth is much more interesting. His life became bigger. The farm became a classroom. The camera became a business. The audience became a community. And the platform became a way to give something back. The reference story provided for this video describes a journey as an unexpected transformation from a farmer documenting his work into a major agricultural media presence. But the most reliable sources add an important perspective. Zach's own stated mission has remained centered on connecting farms and consumers and promoting agriculture, while independent reporting confirms his continuing involvement in farm safety and community support. So when people ask what really happened to Zach Johnson from the Millennial Farmer channel, the answer is not that he suddenly left his old life behind. He expanded it. The farmer who once wanted people to understand what happens in a cornfield ended up creating one of the most recognizable agricultural voices on YouTube. The man who began with a phone and a simple explanation eventually found himself speaking to millions of people. And the creator who could have used that influence only to build a personal brand, instead turned much of it toward problems affecting the people around him. 10 years later, the story is still being written. The tractors are still moving. The crops are still growing. The harvests still depend on weather. The equipment still breaks. And somewhere in Minnesota, there is still a farmer pointing a camera at ordinary work that millions of people now find extraordinary. Maybe that is the biggest surprise of all. Zach Johnson didn't become successful because he stopped being a farmer. He became successful because he showed the world what being a farmer actually looked like. And after 10 years, that simple idea has become something far more powerful than a YouTube channel. It has become a bridge between people who grow food and people who have never seen how that food is produced. From a $92 first check to a million-plus subscriber audience, from farm videos to safety campaigns, scholarships, and community work, the Millennial Farmer story is ultimately not about fame. It is about what can happen when someone takes an ordinary life, tells the truth about it, and gives millions of strangers a reason to care. And if the past 10 years are any indication, the most surprising chapter of Zach Johnson's story may still be ahead. But there's another side of Zach Johnson's story that becomes much more interesting once the novelty of YouTube fame wears off. The real challenge was never getting people to watch one farming video. The difficult part was keeping the audience interested year after year without turning the farm into a performance. Farming doesn't follow a television schedule. Crops don't care about upload deadlines, and weather doesn't wait for a camera crew. That is precisely why the Millennial Farmer channel has remained unusual. Zach's official website still describes him as a fifth-generation family farmer in west-central Minnesota, and its stated mission remains connecting farms and consumers while providing farmer-to-farmer education and encouraging conversation between farmers and the public. The distinction matters because Zach's success could easily have pushed him completely away from a farm. Instead, the farm remains the source of stories. Planting creates videos. Harvest creates videos. Equipment problems create videos. Even the frustrating days become part of the content. And those frustrating days may be some of the most important ones. A perfectly successful harvest can look impressive, but a broken combine tells viewers something about farming that a polished promotional video never could. When machinery stops working during harvest, the farmer doesn't have the luxury of simply postponing the episode until everything is fixed. Time matters. Weather matters. Grain needs to move. Crops can become vulnerable if the window closes. Zach has built much of his reputation by allowing viewers to see those realities instead of hiding them. That approach also explains why his channel became attractive to people who were never farmers. His audience wasn't only interested in agriculture as a profession. They were interested in the human story behind it. Someone watching from a city might never have experienced the pressure of a storm approaching during harvest. They might never have watched a farmer make a decision involving thousands of dollars of machinery, fuel, and crop inputs. They might never have understood how much preparation happens before seed ever enters the ground. Millennial Farmer gave those people a front row seat. And eventually, the audience became large enough to turn that connection into a real business. The official Millennial Farmer website now offers sponsorship opportunities, public speaking, and farm industry tours, showing just how far the operation has expanded beyond simply uploading videos. That evolution creates an interesting contradiction. Zach became successful because his content felt like an ordinary farmer letting people into his life. But as the audience grew, that ordinary life became valuable media. Every tractor ride could become content. Every repair could become content. Every family moment had the potential to attract viewers. Every trip away from the farm could become an opportunity for the Millennial Farmer brand. The challenge was maintaining the boundary between Zach Johnson the farmer and Millennial Farmer the business. That boundary is not always easy to see. For many viewers, Zach is no longer simply the man working the land. He has become a recognizable agricultural communicator. His official website describes him as an agriculture advocate and influencer, and offers speaking opportunities connected to his expertise and public profile. That means the job has changed. There is now a public speaking side. There is a sponsorship side. There is an educational side. There is a charitable side. And there is still the actual farming. Imagine trying to manage all of that while continuing to make decisions about crops and machinery. The internet doesn't make farming easier simply because millions of people are watching. If anything, the visibility creates another layer of responsibility. Zach has also had to learn how to communicate with people who may strongly disagree with him. Agriculture is controversial in ways that many viewers don't realize. Discussions surrounding pesticides, genetically modified crops, environmental impact, land use, and farming technology can quickly become emotional. Zach's original response to that environment was not to become a professional debater. His strategy was to show what farmers actually do. That philosophy has remained central to brand. Instead of saying, "Trust farmers because we're farmers," the channel effectively says, "Come and see what we're doing." That difference is powerful. A viewer can watch planting. They can watch spraying. They can watch maintenance. They can watch harvest. They can hear the reasoning behind decisions. And then they can decide what they think. That is one reason the channel became more than entertainment. It became a form of agricultural communication. YouTube itself highlighted Zach's unusual journey in 2021, describing him as a fifth-generation farmer who was bringing traditional farming practices into the modern era through the platform. YouTube also